Hello everyone, welcome back to the PrimateCast. I'm your host, Andrew McIntosh, and with me is summer intern Sophie Bernstein.
Hello everyone.
Today is July the 31st, 2014, as we continue with the fifth and final installment of our 5-part podcast series taken from coverage of the Japan Society for Animal Psychology annual conference that happened on July 19th through 21st of this year.
Right now we're going to be talking with Dr. Raman Sukumar of the Center for Ecological Sciences and the Indian Institute of Science.
It's a little bit of a different interview because Dr. Sukumar's main research interests are surrounding human-elephant conflict in India, but also more globally. And so he'll be talking a lot about issues surrounding elephant conservation and some of the main areas of conflict between elephants and humans, particularly with a focus on India. But more generally, he's also interested not only in elephant conservation and ecology, but also generally tropical forest ecology, and he will bring in climate change into this conversation.
But don't worry, towards the end of this talk, we're going to get back to the theme of the conference and looking at how cognition can give some clues into how to mitigate this conflict between elephants and humans. So now let's hear about conservation of elephants.
Yeah, one of the major challenges that we face with the conservation of Asian elephants is conflicts between elephants and people over agriculture. You have elephants coming out from the forest into the sort of human-dominated landscapes, the damaged crops, they sometimes kill people, and this is a problem that seems to be growing over the years. And ultimately, if conservation in developing countries with large human populations, and relatively fragmented forests, if that has to succeed, elephants have to be accepted by local people. And therefore, it is imperative that we find solutions to minimizing elephant-human conflicts if we are to conserve the elephant.
And here Dr. Sukumar goes on to tell us the key factors involved in this conflict.
Mainly elephants are in conflict with people over agriculture. There is a lot of cultivation, not just along the boundaries of forests and human settlement, but also within forest areas where you have maybe small villages, large villages, settlements of different types. All this is very historical because India has been populated for a very long time, and people have moved into areas which are suitable for agriculture and for settlement. And this is there are historical references to elephants coming out and raiding crops. This is not a new problem that has just occurred recently, but elephants come out and damage crops. These are crops such as cereals like paddy and millets, finger millets, maize. Sugarcane is grown in a lot of areas today. Banana. In fact, a number of different types of crops that we cultivate as food is also very attractive towards elephants. Elephants also sometimes damage houses, especially when people have stored grain or salt, or sometimes locally brewed liquor. Elephants find liquor very attractive, and they are usually attracted by the smell of liquor, I suspect. So they typically target houses which are usually very flimsy kind of dwellings in rural areas that people live in, and it's very easy for an elephant to break the wall of a hut inside in a small village inside the forest, and sometimes people get killed in the process. And usually when farmers try to chase the elephants away, elephants can turn aggressive towards people. Almost more than 30 years ago, when I began my studies of elephants, on average in a year, about 150 people were being killed by wild elephants in India alone. And today, just for you to understand the magnitude of the problem, the number of people being killed each year is about 500 people. So the problem has grown more than threefold. So you have damage to crops, you have damage to property, and you have people being directly killed by elephants. And so that's the nature of the conflict, essentially.
Now, what I thought was really interesting about Dr. Sukumar's talk at this conference, usually when we think about conservation issues in human-animal wildlife conflict, it's often because of the encroachment and issues with habitat loss and fragmentation, the animals being driven out of their native habitats. But at the same time, you mentioned other factors that actually attract animals outside, even in well-protected, or even pristine habitats.
So he calls this the push and pull factor. So certain things that are pushing the elephants out encroachment, as Andrew mentioned, and other factors such as invasive species, but also pulling the elephants back to these human habitats, things that are really attractive to the elephants, and we'll hear about that now.
All across Asia, if you look at the range of the elephant, I've estimated that elephants today occupy only about 6% of the original range that they had about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Well, this has been a process of gradually humans eating into elephants' habitat, fragmenting the habitat, and obviously reducing the habitat to unsustainable levels for maintaining elephant populations in many places. This is a process that is still ongoing at different rates in different countries and different regions. So, for instance, in countries like Indonesia, there's been large-scale expansion of oil palm plantation into tropical rainforest, and this has greatly reduced the habitat available to elephants. In other countries or other regions, like in southern India, for instance, it's not so much habitat loss. Habitat has been lost historically, but today, over the last few decades, there is no significant loss of habitat, although the threat of habitat fragmentation is still there. But other parts of India, like central India, you have mining within elephant habitat, so their habitat has certainly been lost. The situation is quite complex if you really look at the reasons for the decline of the elephant. In Southeast Asia, for instance, elephants have been hunted heavily in recent decades. They have been killed for meat and other products, ivory to a certain extent, and therefore elephants have disappeared. In Northeast India, it's been a combination of loss of habitat as well as hunting and illegal capture of elephants. But the problem of elephant-human conflict still exists in places like southern India, where there is no perceptible significant loss of habitat in recent times. This is because, ironically, with better protection measures for the elephants, with better conservation of elephants, the elephant populations are increasing. And therefore, you have the situation where elephants are now coming out of the forest areas. There's too much of very high density elephant populations. So elephants are coming out of forest areas and they're spilling over into human dominated landscapes. So this is what I call both the push and the pull factor. The push factor is a number of different factors operating within elephant habitats. So you can have, in principle, you can have ecological degradation of the habitat. So there are people going into the forest, they are perhaps cutting trees, they are transforming the habitat. Natural habitats are being invaded by plants like Lantana camara, which is a highly invasive species, perhaps reducing the amount of forage available for elephants within the natural habitat. Then you have increasing populations, you have very high population density, so there could be increasing competition among elephants. So all these tend to push elephants out of the forest. And the pull factors are the attraction of human landscapes for elephants, our production landscapes for elephants, because with better irrigation, especially with groundwater being tapped for agriculture in recent decades, people are growing crops, are growing more crop. They're growing crops for longer time periods. The crops are very attractive. These are very highly productive landscapes for agriculture outside the forest, and therefore, once elephants encounter these lands where attractive sugarcane or paddy is grown, not only these areas are very productive for elephants, but also that the crops that we cultivate are more tasty, they are more nutritious, they have higher levels of nutrients like protein and calcium and sodium, and therefore some elephants now become addicted to these landscapes. They find that they are able to make a better living outside natural forest areas. So we have this ironic situation that if you look at the condition of elephants inside national parks, which are fairly intact large areas of forest, you find that elephants are in poorer body condition than elephants that have come out of the forest, and elephants are found in these agricultural areas. So you have this very complex kind of situation where elephant-human conflicts are being promoted by a combination of different factors: habitat loss and fragmentation, habitat degradation in some cases, but at the same time, humans creating landscapes that have, agricultural crops that have higher levels of productivity, that have better water sources, and so on, that elephants find very, very attractive.
So Dr. Sukumar has given us a clear explanation of what these different factors are in terms of elephant conservation. But now he's going to give us some solutions in terms of how to work out this balancing act between habitat and carrying capacity of elephants.
In fact, I think one of the dilemmas that we face today is that, what do you do, how do you manage conflicts in situations where you have these very dense elephant populations, and elephants are very clearly coming out and almost totally residing in areas where elephants have not been there in maybe 50 or 100 years. They're found in areas where you have a mosaic of paddy fields and coffee plantations and settlements and villages, and people have to move amidst these wild elephants there. And therefore, one option is to actually remove these elephants from those areas. And then the question arises as to what do you do with these wild elephants that you remove. One option is to put them back in some forest area, a so-called natural habitat. But the big question is, would that succeed? Because some experiments in the past in countries like Sri Lanka and also in India, with bull elephants being relocated in other areas, suggest that these would fail because elephants tend to go back to the places where they have been captured from. But I think, on the other hand, we need to do these experiments simply because you can't take all wild elephants back into captivity. As these elephants go out into human landscapes, you can't take all of them into captivity. But on the other hand, I think there might be no other option. But if elephants that have killed people, elephants that are likely to, again, come into conflict and make impact on the lives of people, you may have to take some elephants into captivity. So you can have different kinds of strategies. At the same time, I think now the government is beginning to experiment with barriers. In the past, what they did was they dug ditches along the boundary of forest and cultivation. But ditches very rarely work well because, except perhaps in very dry areas. Because come the rains, the monsoon, and the soil gets washed into the ditches, and they become disused over time, and therefore the elephants can very easily cross over. Electric fences, these are high voltage electric fences, which give a pulsed current of a millisecond duration, and these are very safe. They kind of give a shock to the elephant, but they do not kill an elephant. These are being tried on a large scale. But the key to the success of an electric fence is the maintenance of the fence. And unless you have a situation where both the government and the local communities, they cooperate in maintaining the fence, the elephant somehow finds a weak point in the fence and it's able to break through. And elephants learn very quickly. After all, they're very intelligent creatures. The bull elephants with tusks, they learn that tusks are poor conductors. So they use the tusks to poke the insulators or to break a wire. The tuskless bulls learn that the soles of their feet are poor conductors. So they rear up on their hind legs and they bring their forelegs down on the wires and break the wires. And you won't believe this, but even female elephants are very clever. They learn, they walk along the fence. They sometimes break a branch and put it on the fence. They push a tree over the fence and then they break the wires. Or sometimes, it's unbelievable that they push the young elephants. They learn that the shock itself is not lethal to an elephant. So they push the younger elephant onto the fence. That quickly breaks the wire, and and then the elephant sort of.
So the shock is not so bad, but it's better if someone else.
Someone else takes the shock rather than yourself. So they use all these different means to kind of break through these fences. More recently, in the state of Karnataka in southern India, where I come from, the government is experimenting with mechanical barriers. So these are sort of physical fences that hopefully the elephants will not break. These are using, this disused rolling stock of where the trains, the railway lines, and they have just begun to experiment with these to see if the elephants could be kept inside the forests.
Yeah, so as we all know, when you have these things, these ideas on paper for solutions to mitigate these human-animal conflicts, it always looks so simple, but obviously in practice, there are so many issues that go in, and so rarely they work, or at least not to the full potential or the expectations that we had. So there's always a constant struggle to think of new ways to come up and try and balance these things.
And knowing that elephants are cognitively complex animals, we asked Dr. Sukumar to tell us how they can use that to their benefit.
I think the directions are as follows. You essentially have to condition these elephants to avoid human settlements and crop fields. And how do you do it? Elephants are getting cues about the attractiveness of agricultural crops, perhaps through smell and through taste. So other ways in which you can try and block those senses in manner that prevents them from going or dissuades them from eating these crops, for instance. So you can perhaps introduce maybe crops that are sprayed with a certain chemical that the elephant finds distasteful and perhaps avoids these crops. The other option is to try and see whether you can block the chemical cues that crops send out. When they begin to flower, for instance, there is a certain odor that they send out. Is there a way of masking that odor and thereby kind of not announcing or signaling the readiness of a crop for being consumed by elephants. There is also perhaps potential for using sounds, and people have already begun to do this. Playback calls of a predator like a tiger or a leopard, and try to see how elephants whether they can discriminate, whether they are frightened enough to avoid the calls of a predator. So there are people who have now started using playback calls of along paths where elephants used to come, enter from the forest into a settlement. There could also be a potential of using elephant calls themselves. Elephants communicate through a variety of different sound frequencies and some of the real complex sounds and language. There might be a kind of a structure to this that they use, goes into infrasonics, to very low sound frequencies that humans cannot hear. Now, I think the key is to really understand the context of a given infrasonic call, and perhaps use that to play back sounds that could maybe the call of a musk elephant, for instance. Could it be played to the infrasound of a musk elephant? Could it be of a musk bull? Could it deter a young bull coming into a crop field from keeping away? So one really has to sort of try these kinds of experiments before we are convinced that something will work with a creature as intelligent as an elephant.
So we wish Dr. Sukumar and all the folks that are working on these solutions the best of luck in their future endeavors. But until now, we have been focusing mainly on these direct conflicts between humans and wildlife, particularly elephants. But at the same time, Dr. Sukumar's work also touches upon issues such as climate change, which represents an important indirect effect of human modifications of the environment. And so now, to end the interview, he's going to talk a little bit about how his work has shown the importance of climate change and how we might be able to use that information to predict future events.
In the 1980s, we had a very major El Nino-driven drought. 1982 has been described as one of the worst El Ninos of the last century. Now, what I noticed was that soon after that, elephants, an entire clan of elephants, an entire clan means a number of related families, maybe 50 plus elephants, they left their original habitat in the state of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, in southern India, and they moved north into a region where elephants had never been found in the last 400 or 500 years. Now, it was clear to me that the trigger for this movement of a clan or dispersal of a clan from their native habitat into a different area, 100 or 200 kilometers away, was this drought. So something very similar happened during 1986, which is again an El Nino year, which again had implications for the monsoon. The monsoons failed. And this time in central India, another clan of elephants, again about 50 elephants or so, from the state of Bihar, now it's called Jharkhand. It left that state and started moving deeper and deeper into the southern part of the state of West Bengal. And this is now when they started this movement, they found that there were patches of forests which were degraded in the past historically, but which have now been regenerated. So they found this to be very convenient habitats for them to take refuge during the daytime and raid the attractive paddy fields during the nighttime. And this is a pattern that has continued ever since then. And now this number has actually grown now from about 50 to 100 or 150. And some of this increase at least is because of an increase in the population. These elephants are doing quite well in spite of making these long distance movements into another area. They're spending more and more time in these areas. The initial trigger for this was a climatic event. And what I worry is that that in the future, with global warming and with climate change, it is predicted that climate, irrespective of the nature of change, we know that temperatures are going to increase. When it comes to the monsoon, we're not very sure how the monsoon is going to change. But we know that there's going to be much greater variability in the monsoon. So you might have some years with very good rainfall and other years with very low rainfall. So if the frequency of those kinds of events increase, or droughts increase, then this could actually trigger more frequent movement or dispersal of elephants out of the forest, into human landscapes, which means that the potential for more frequent and more intense conflict with people, is there with climate change. And I've been seeing that, I've been looking at figures of people being killed by elephants over time. And there is a very clear relationship between the number of people being killed and a drought and the frequency of drought or the occurrence of drought. So during drought years, there's a sudden spike in the number of people being killed. And to me, it's very clear that an adverse climate event could set the potential for more increased conflict between elephants and people.
So once again, we'd like to thank very much Dr. Raman Sukumar for joining us on the PrimateCast and sharing with us not only his research, but also the really important issue of human-wildlife conflict and elephant conservation in India and around the world.
We'd also like to thank all of the other invited guests that came out for the JSAP. It was so nice hearing from everyone.
Yeah, it was a really cool conference in the end. And, for me, as listeners may or may not know, that animal psychology is not exactly my main area of interest, or interest is the wrong word, but area of research. So it was a really great learning opportunity for me to come and see a lot of really interesting talks from researchers from all over the world. And so for Sophie as well, how was it for you engaging your first mobile podcasting unit action, saying on location for the first time?
It was great. I have a focus in psychology. That's my background. So it was really nice to be able to sit down with a lot of these people and ask the many, many, many questions I had that couldn't be covered during their talks.
Well, congratulations on a job very well done, Sophie. It was great working with you on the podcast. And I say that as if it's some kind of an ending, but temporarily at least it is, as you'll be off to the field very soon.
Yeah, I'm off to China for 6 months, but I hope the listeners enjoyed this coverage of the JSAP as much as I did.
And they'll certainly be able to tune in the future when you're back with us again next year.
Yeah, stay tuned.
You have been listening to the PrimateCast, a podcast series dedicated to the study and conservation of primates around the world. Brought to you by the Centre for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology of the Primate Research Institute of Kyoto University. Visit us online at www.cicaspr.pri.kyoto-u.ac.jp/news/podcasts and follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/theprimatecast and on Twitter at theprimatecast.